Welcome to the Equipping Leaders podcast, Leader Study Series. I'm Natasha, a leader development professional, and I would say that leadership is my passion. I love leading and supporting leaders in their leadership journey.
And I'm Corey, a program manager, emerging leader, and overall leadership enthusiast.
In this Leader Study Series, we're going through the 7 episodes of the 2011 sci-fi show Terra Nova. For each episode, we will deconstruct the leaders and decisions of the characters on the show. Leadership is demonstrated in many different ways, and we're looking forward to talking about the actions, responses, and opportunities to show up as a leader.
Terra Nova aired in 2011, so there will be spoilers in these episodes. Throughout the episodes, we'll talk about emotional intelligence, difficult conversations, building and maintaining trust, and more. Let's jump in.
Okay, so we are on episode 3 of Terra Nova, and this is the episode titled What Remains. And it was an interesting situation that played out in this, where they had this outpost, where they had some research scientists who maybe went a little bit rogue. We don't really know the whole story yet. We'll kind of deconstruct that as we go through it. But there were a lot of really cool, I thought, leadership things that happened right from the start of this episode. But I'll pass it over to you. What stood out to you from the beginning?
So one of the things, like the overarching themes that I noticed, and I'm gonna hold back on the leadership pieces, so to speak, for your comments first. But I thought that there was an interesting breakdown of people not following orders, or like guidance in this episode. So there was a lot of cases where you know Jim was told, like, hey, there could be an infection or something going on in this outpost, don't go there, and he's like, got it, did it anyway, right? So there was a lot of like following his own orders for that. And I thought that was really interesting, as well as like they had on like gas masks, and Jim's got broken, but then the other guy took it off, and it was just like, that seems silly in like a laboratory environment type thing to do that when there could be this unknown pathogen. So I just thought that piece really stuck out to me, because that's the first time that it to me, it showed like that they're becoming more comfortable, because they broke a lot of rules to get to Terra Nova, right? And then they got there, and Commander Taylor was like, you're starting a clean slate type thing, and they sort of did as they were told for a minute, but then there's starting to be a little bit of a breakdown, and again, there's like some emotional things that are leveraged into that as well. But I don't know what your thoughts were on that. I thought it was interesting.
Well, I think we break different rules at different times, of course, for different reasons. And I think that one of the big things in this episode too was, it's not even about breaking rules. It's just really about choices, because rules makes it sound so punitive and like you're going to get in trouble. And it's like, we're all adults here, so like grow up. But yeah, I mean, I think that, yeah, there were orders that were given. Some people followed them and some people didn't. But I don't necessarily think that means it's a breakdown. I think it just more means that people are empowered differently to make choices.
Yeah, no, that's a good point. So one of the things that did stick out to me, though, from the leadership perspective, was with Commander Taylor, was when they realized that there was an issue at this outpost, he said, he told everyone what was going to happen, right? I'm going here. This person's in charge while I'm away. If you have any questions or issues, like, that's your person to go to. I'm taking these people with me. If you don't hear from us by this X amount of time, right, these are the next steps. So I thought that he did a really great job of putting into place mechanisms, because he knew he was going into a potentially dangerous or like long-term thing, right? He didn't know what he was going up against, so he sort of planned for every eventuality.
Yes, that was one of the first things I noticed that I appreciated about Taylor's. I just appreciate Taylor's leadership in general. But yeah, where he also, when people asked why, like the chief scientist, when he was like, I should be going, those are my people out there. And Taylor said, it's a tech situation, not a science situation. So, he was very clear, and like, here's who I'm taking and why I'm taking them, and here's who's staying back. And like you said, something happens to me, here's who's in charge. Washington is in charge. And, then with the hope and the assumption that everyone would follow that plan that was well thought out. So yeah, I liked that right at the beginning where he just established this leadership and this essentially this chain of command, knowing that as the leader, if something were to happen to him, obviously other things could start to break down. So he was like not even willing to risk that.
Yeah, that really stuck out to me. Then one of the other things was with um Elizabeth. So when they get into that lab, they find some of the people that were at that lab. They kind of have like this amnesia thing, and they think that they're still back in like the old world, like they're not in Terra Nova. Some of them are a little bit more like aggressive and violent, and I think that not just like Commander Taylor and some of the other like foot soldiers, for lack of a better word, that were with him, but I think that Elizabeth did a really great job of like meeting them and approach like here's where their mindset is, right? I'm going to meet them at that, and like really tried to explain like what was real and what wasn't, provide evidence for that, but was very like um understanding. And I think that obviously an amnesia causing crazy virus in dinosaur land, hopefully you're not running into that in your daily business too often, but I encounter people a lot of times within my like professional field where they'll have like a lot of anchor biases, or like this is how it is because this is how it always is. And it's like sometimes you'll be like the future's now, old man, right? Like we're not using floppy disks anymore. And I think that she approached that really really well. And I think Commander Taylor, he tried, and it's not that he couldn't do that. He realized Elizabeth was doing a better job about that. He backed off. He let her take point in that situation because that was a strength of hers, and he realized that. So he did his best to support her by making sure no dinosaurs came after him. So I thought that was really a great leadership quality too, where he throttled back and let this other person lead with their strength.
I think, yeah, he demonstrated that no, he knows who to use for what job.
Yeah.
Essentially, people are all these different levers that you can pull, and he knew that she was the one who could do that well, like you said. And realizing sometimes we realize things in the moment where we're like, we know this person is a great scientist or a great technician, and then in the moment you're like, oh, these soft skills are on point too. That's not something you can like necessarily measure on paper. And yeah, I appreciated that too. And I think yeah, with the virus that was made in this lab, they were trying to cure something else, but essentially in the delivery of trying to find this other cure, they created this virus that made people regress. They just started to regress. So they were, wherever they were in their past and whoever they were at that time. And I thought that was really interesting because it wasn't who they are now in this past thing, it's who they are, who they were then. And so what I thought was interesting about that too was that regression and who we were is such a big part of becoming who we are. And I know that sounds like very like hippie and obvious, but I think that sometimes we forget that like we've all made mistakes. We've all been more aggressive or too passive or things in the past for these different situations, like as we were learning and growing. And that ultimately it kind of leads to who we are now. So for Commander Taylor, when he went back, obviously he's a soldier in the middle of a war zone, and his partner Ayani had just been taken, partner wife had just been taken, and so he's in that place, right, of this aggression and that emotion. But if we look at that and then we look at the Commander Taylor we know now, obviously two different situations, of course, but two different people, right? But one had to lead to the other. So in order for him to be this understanding of other people's strengths and being able to find the right people for the right job and accept what his role is in different things, he had to go through times when he had to be really aggressive. Things happened that obviously were very tragic, and he had to work through, he had to find his leadership that's so effective now. You could be a leader your whole career, your whole life. That doesn't mean you're an effective leader. It means you're in a position of authority. So then he finds his leadership, and now he's leading Terra Nova.
Yeah, it's such a great point too, because I think it was interesting, kind of jumping around in the storyline here. You know, Jim doesn't get affected by the amnesia because, from a spoiler alert perspective, him having like a cold or whatever means that that virus or whatever it is doesn't take hold with him. So he's the only one who remains present now, out of everyone that ends up being there. And some people end up having these spurts where they kind of jump in and out of now and past. And I think that that's, Jim handles that pretty well. And it's almost, I guess you'd call it comical in a sense, because he sort of has these moments of, am I dealing with you or past you, right? As they're going through and doing these things. And I think the sort of levity that he takes with that frustration, I think is a good leadership skill of not, oh my gosh, this is so stressful, right? He just sort of rolls with it a little bit, and I appreciate that, because that's how I try to approach things too. Is with slightly more like optimistic humor of, it's going to be what it's going to be sometimes. So I thought that that was one a really great strength from Jim. And then one of the other things that I thought was sort of interesting is with Commander Taylor and him suffering, right? Like you had talked about, he goes back to this very, like, in the past where it was a lot more aggressive and, scarce resources and stuff. So this kind of like very offensive, almost militaristic guy, and he's trying to find his wife and everything else. And he's very aggressive. And that's something that we haven't really seen on the surface level of Commander Taylor. So that's like getting to see some of where, like you were talking about, where he was versus where he is and has developed as a leader. And to know that those, I think it's amazing to know the self control that he has, because that kind of anger still probably exists in him, but he has it under control now and is a very effective leader. And I just thought that that was kind of nice, that you can grow as a person. You don't always have to be what you were. And I thought that was really interesting. If I say interesting one more time, reach out through the camera and slap me.
It's just your word of the day. Yeah, so going back to the Jim piece, there was one scene where one of the guards, him and Malcolm, the chief scientist who is affected by the virus, are moving one of the guards to safety. The guard is passed out or passed away. We don't know, but the guard is passed out. So they're moving him. And partway through moving him, Malcolm is like, did we kill him? Did I kill him? So he's panicking. And you're right, Jim, just in that moment, he was just like, okay, like, just that acceptance of like, I understand the situation. There is nothing to get upset about on my end. Let me just try to like, get this person back to balance to help me finish this task. So I agree that was a really great leadership quality that Jim demonstrated there. And yeah, and then with Commander Taylor, I think also there are just certain situations and there's certain things that cause us certain situations just demand for us to be more directive and less collaborative. Especially like in his situation was a military situation. There wasn't like let's have a chat about it. Like he was in a war zone. And then, yeah, like the whole thing with his wife, but I don't know that necessarily means that he like harbors all that anger and stuff forever. I think it's just a matter of, we've all been angry before, right? We've all been in situations that we've absolutely hated being in before. Hopefully not too many and not for too long, but yeah, it's that whole, if he hadn't been able to go through that, we find out later, the loss of his spouse and just the, him being unsure of where his son is in those moments and that kind of stuff, where it's like those feelings, like learning to work through those feelings, I think is something that is also great leadership quality. And I know we've talked about like reflection and journaling and all that stuff on here before, but it's true, because what you said just kind of like reminded me of that, where it's like, you will harbor that forever if you don't figure out a way to work through it. And whether that's through therapy, through coaching, usually through therapy, but in doing that though, then it does truly make you more empathetic as a leader. It makes you more open-minded, and gives you kind of that, like, I'll call it that Jim quality of, okay, I get what's happening. I see what's happening right now. You're angry. Or even if we go back to Taylor in the first episode, where he was like, I don't care about the laws from a world that doesn't exist here. I care about what's here and this piece right now. But like, if he hadn't worked through all those things, acceptance of who he had been and what had happened, he wouldn't have ever gotten there.
Yeah. No, that's working through that stuff, like you'd said, and talking through it is really, I've started to learn how important that is. I tended to be somebody that would just, things like that, just leave it at work, push it down, forget about it, try to move on. But I think, like you said, it is really important to sort of talk through that sometimes with even at a small case, right, with a peer at work, of just sort of like, talking through it really helps you get past it. Um, on a different topic, so going back to Elizabeth, right?
Yeah.
One of the other things I thought that was really interesting about her is, so she's having this amnesia piece. Obviously, her and Jim have like a really long history together. Um and I think Jim has a sort of compassion about, he doesn't get angry that she doesn't remember him. He's trying to be effective because he knows that his personal what do you want to call it? Like, the hurt that he feels from her not remembering who he is and all that, he doesn't really let that be a problem. Um his main goal is to get everyone into a safe space, right? And so he works through that. But what I really think shows some great skill from Elizabeth is, before she before she got the amnesia, as she started to realize that that was a symptom or could be a cause, she started taking notes, leaving video diaries. She wrote down people's names, things like that, as like, hopefully, like, reminders. And I mean, I know it's a bit of a stretch, but one of the biggest weaknesses that I have, and I notice a lot of people that I work with in leadership roles, is a lack of documentation, right? I
Mhm.
know how to do it, so that's fine. That, I'm not going anywhere. You don't know that, right? You could get struck by meteor tomorrow, or, you know, uh, your job could go away. You could get fired. Or another job could come up. And if you really care about that organization and you don't document that stuff for the next person, you're not helping move that team forward. And I think that as a leader, you get caught up in this, like, when people always talk like, servant leader, right? Everyone's favorite term. I've started to kind of have that mindset of, you're always going to care about yourself, but you also, as a good leader, you have to care about the team. And one of the things that makes the team successful is, if you go away, that next leader can start from where that team was, right? They don't have to start all over again. Um, and so, that was sort of something that really stuck out to me, is that documentation that she was writing down. If she went fully, I don't know what, amnesiatic, right? I made that up. That's a scientific term now. But if she went full on amnesia crazy mode, she tried to document as much as she could up to that point, because the person that was there before her, yeah, they ended up finding that he did do a little bit of it, but not a super great job of that, right? So it was like, she's trying to make sure that the next group that comes in can start where she left off, and not start over from the beginning of what's wrong with everybody. So that was, that's what I thought was really awesome from like a leadership quality.
I agree. Yeah. And that documentation piece, people get so scared to document. They're
Yeah.
worried about, like, if I document this, does this mean they could fire me? But like you said, it's not about you. It's really about the team. And going back to what you said about Jim and his not being not being like hurt, or not expressing that hurt, maybe of Elizabeth not remembering who he was. I think there were two really big things at play there. And one was that he cared more about what was going on with, like, what it meant for everybody as a group, knowing that it was a much bigger thing. So he was really caring about the team, but also he wasn't letting his ego get in the way of this whole thing where it's like, well, I'm hurt and she doesn't remember me, and I, me, my, and all that nonsense that people who have huge egos and, small brains talk about. Because, he could have gone into that, and probably we would have been empathetic to that. It's his wife. They've been together a long time. But yeah, but there is this piece where it's like, his ego was much smaller than his belief in her and his care for her and the rest of Terra Nova. So I think that that's another thing that we need to remember, is that the ego is never going to go away. we're always going to have these moments of it's like, "Duh, but what about me?" However, when we can step back and it's like, okay, but I also, again, he has that ability to be like, I can see what's going on here. And I can see that it's not about me. It's not about us. It's about this bigger thing. And I believe in this person. Whether she remembers me or not, I care about her and I care about what we had together. And I'm now not going to just devolve into, a child or into hurt and mess things up even more, by doing that. So yeah, I thought those are really good points.
Yeah. So other than those sort of key things for me, I think some of the other stuff that stuck out was um as the group sort of like regroups, right? As they get everybody back onto Terra Nova, I think they do a really great job of deconstructing the situation, right? Discussing the things that they saw, discussing, you know, like the feelings they had, and like you were talking about, in that moment where they had dinosaurs and everything coming after them, and people forgetting who they were, they didn't have time to do that. But even in the interim, as things were starting to stable out or settle, right, which they weren't fully settled yet, they still Commander Taylor, Elizabeth, Jim, they understood the importance of let's take this time right now. Let's talk about what we've seen, what we've experienced, what we felt, and I think that that's really key because they put everybody back on the same page, right? Because Jim had seen pretty much all of it. Commander Taylor maybe like fake numbers, but like 50% of it. Elizabeth maybe 80% of it. They made sure that everybody was back on 100% understanding of what sort of situations had taken place, and I thought that was really good too.
Yeah, again, it goes back to that whole reflection of what was learned, reflection of what was experienced, not only for that documentation piece for the entire group, but also for just a matter of, you know, how do we, what all did we, like, we're the leaders of this group essentially. How do we work through this? I think someone else who had a really strong leadership role in this episode was, of course, Lieutenant Washington, who was left in charge when Commander Taylor left.
Yeah.
And when Jim was like, hey, like, what's the status? She was very good about being like, here's what was told to us, right? Like, here are the orders that we were given. Let me reiterate in case, you forgot or whatever. She didn't say it like that. She said it very well, but she was like, here are the orders. Now, if this thing changes, I will look at this alternate course. So she wasn't just like, I'm going to follow these rules till the ends of the earth. She was very much like, I was put in, place as the leader here and told to do this. I trust Taylor and the plan that he put in place. Also, I understand things can go awry. So what will I do if that doesn't work out? These are some alternative actions that we can take. And then even when Taylor gets back to Terra Nova and he still is infected by the virus and he's still looking for his wife, still in that Smalley war zone mindset, he, Washington does a really good job of leveraging the relationship that they've obviously had for a long time. They've obviously known each other through the military for a long time, and laying it out in a way that wasn't intrusive, but that was factual and logical, in a way to be like, let me try to explain this, but not trying to explain Terra Nova in the future and like trying to do all of that. Just like, let's just start with the piece that you're the most concerned about right now. And I think that's a really important leadership quality too, is that people, I've seen this in planning meetings, right? Where they're like, what about this? And we got to worry about this and this and this. And it's like, but what you're forgetting is, what are people concerned about right now? Like right now. And so just a real world example is people are like, oh, this comms plan for this whole hybrid thing we're going to do, and this, that, and the other. And really what people's questions are is like, how many days do I have to go in, and what are the core hours? Can I still drop my kids off in the morning? Can I still pick them up? And those are people's questions. They don't care about like what the whole big policy is. Nobody's going to read that whole thing. And so I think sometimes, with this, just sometimes leaders, they get so strategic that they forget about the execution, and they forget about the human beings on the other end of that, to being like, what actually matters to them. And if you can find what matters to them, they're going to go along with whatever change you have, not because, oh, it's my job and I have to, but because you met them where they were, right? You were like, I see that this is the concern that you have. Let's address that first. right? Your concerns first, and then we'll get to this other thing.
Yeah, I that like you said, the attention to and calling out what affects people right now. You're right. That's missed by so many different folks and people. I think in those leadership roles because they like to stay in that big heady, you know, grand picture. And yeah, am I going to be able to pick my kids up is something that really just affects somebody right now. And ultimately, it's one of those things where it's like, yes, you'll still, all right, then I buy in, you know what I mean? Or no. And then it's like, well, now I'm a little interested. Why wouldn't I be able to? What makes this so important that it's more important than me being able to do these things? So yeah, that's a really great point.
I think one of the things too that in some of my experience in the military, I got to see very senior people who were like, let me meet you where you are and help you with what's going on right now. And this is kind of a silly example, but we were unloading this truck and it just had a bunch of supplies and stuff on it. And even though some of us were more senior, it was very much like, I'm not going to ask somebody to do something I'm not willing to do. Also, many hands make light work. Let's just unload this truck. And the most senior command sergeant major was driving by and he stopped, he parked, he got out and he helped us unload the truck, finished helping us unload the truck, and then he went about his day. So it's also just one of those things where sometimes people get into more senior position. Now, I'm not saying that his job should be to unload trucks. Absolutely not. We're paying him to think much bigger than that. But sometimes people get stuck on the other side where they're like, I'm paid to think. And it's like, but if nobody ever sees you do or show up or interact, that's a problem too. They don't care what you're thinking about then because they know you're not thinking about them. You're thinking about some other big strategic thing. And so I think that really good leaders, especially the more senior you get, you have to be able to, and I've seen it done, of course, very well, find that balance of how do I help you, do some things with you also to let you know that I am a team player, but also this is your job and this is my job. And so I'll help you with pieces that I can, but it's ultimately my job to, do these other things. So yeah, to not get stuck on one side or the other.
That's a really great point. I Yeah, the only other for me the only other thing that really stuck out to me in this episode was that you had uh Josh, right? The one of the teenagers, I think it's the son of Jim and Elizabeth. Um, he's got like these like personal goals of like getting his getting like somebody else, one of his old friends, through the Terra Nova thing. And he approaches some other people that know about some shady ways to have that happen. And it turns out that that shady way is there's a connection to the Sixers, right? For that to happen. And what I think is that I think is the bartender, barkeep is the guy. He goes forward to is it Mariah? Is she the Sixers boss lead lady? Um, doesn't matter. But he's like, oh, keep your friends close and your enemies closer. And that again, they're the villain in this story, at least as it stands right now from what I've watched. That that can always change. It's television, but um, I think that whole level of like subversiveness, right? And like that they're trying to do something great, and you have these people that are just always trying to ruin it. Um, I think that's it. We always hear like leadership talk about, oh, we're gonna nip that in the butt. We're gonna nip that in the butt. Like that's one of those things where it's like, how do you manage that? How do you deal with that when they're completely they have no idea that that's Commander Taylor, Jim, everyone. They have no idea that that's happening. Um, and I would say that Jim himself and Commander Taylor tends to have a pretty good pulse on what's going on within the Terra Nova community. So it's like, you can't always plan for everything, but as a leader, how do you keep an eye out for those potential danger or pitfalls that people are falling into?
Yeah, I think that, as much as you can keep your ear to the ground and kind of going a little bit into what I said previously, where it's like the higher up in leadership you get, the further away you get from those types of things. So how do you stay really connected? I think like another way that I would also reframe that is to think about it that on Commander Taylor's side, he is building this future utopian society, but maybe that's not what everybody's version of utopia is. Right. So maybe the Sixers just have a different version of what they think a better future is, and they're going about executing it a different way. I'm not saying that, who's the good guy or the bad guy. We all know Commander Taylor's the good guy, but it's just that element of, it's just somebody else's perspective, right? Somebody comes into an organization, they have all these different ideas about where to take it. Some people can be like, we're doing really well. We're doing this, we're doing that. And then all of a sudden you have a blockbuster Netflix thing on your hands where they're like, streaming, okay, calm down. That's never going to work. And then 5 years later, Blockbuster who?
I think there's still one in Alaska or something.
But yeah. No, another good episode. I do like that they have these futuristic but really fun and interesting challenges with each episode. So they get to use all the different types of minds, the scientists, the firepower, all that.
Yeah.